We're just going to hear briefly from two of our local activists, from Nick from Canal and River Trust and Andy from the Liverpool City Region Pride Foundation. So, Nick, over to you.
Okay, yeah, this is working. So, I'm Nick Smith. I'm from Canal and River Trust, an organisation you may have heard of. We're a charitable organisation, nationwide, national charity, 2,000 miles of canals, rivers, docks, locks, culverts and reservoirs right across the country that we manage. And we manage them and we maintain them for the well-being, but increasingly we manage and maintain them for the well-being benefits that we recognise they deliver to all of the communities which we pass through, and we pass through hugely diverse communities. The relevance here is actually that we manage and maintain the water space across the South Docks, which many people don't realise, and we've also got the Leeds-Liverpool Canal as it travels out through Sefton and then beyond. So a couple of key things that came through from me, from Philip and Carla, was coherence. So devolution to us offers us a degree of coherence, consistency. I'm going to mention the M word again, but Manchester has done this for the best part of 20 to 25 years until they got the devolution deal, the Association of Greater Manchester Authorities, or AGMA. So we worked with them, and that was very coherent for us. That was a body that we could work with, talk to, same people. You kind of could capture the same people at different meetings. So that gives us a degree of coherence and confidence. It's a functional area for us, and so that's spilling out now into Liverpool and across to other areas as well. So that's a benefit from a national organisation. Where do we plough our resources? Where do we focus our efforts? We were doing an awful lot in Greater Manchester because that worked for us in terms of the people we spoke to and how we were able to unlock some resources, but it's increasingly becoming so now in the combined authority in Liverpool. I think devolution helps us to work a lot local as well, a lot more local, and I'm going to talk about Sefton because we've got a project that's just started up in Sefton recently, Community Roots project, and that is absolutely about what Carla's saying. It's about connecting with people at a grassroots level and engaging them with the waterways, because we know that people feel better after visiting waterways. And so how do people want to engage, and how do they want to use the waterways, which is a local asset that we manage and maintain, but how can local people take ownership of that and work with us? So the devolution agenda kind of gives us that local focus, but the combined authority gives us those inroads into the local communities as well. And I think just a word that Philip mentioned a couple of times, this idea of partitioning. It made me think of a project a number of years ago that I was involved with, and it was on the Rochdale Canal. So the Rochdale Canal travels from Manchester city centre right up into Calderdale, passes through a whole variety of different communities, from inner city Manchester, Newton Heath, Fellsworth, through Oldham and Rochdale, and up to the beautiful kind of Hebden Bridge, Todmorden sort of areas. And many years ago, there was a project which took a load of kids from Newton Heath, took them up to Sowerby Bridge, and vice versa. Kids from Sowerby Bridge came down into Manchester. They were connected by the canal, and it was just that. It's kind of a light bulb moment for some of the kids that it was kind of just down the road. They were two completely different communities to an extent, but the waterways were connecting these people. So that partitioning across the country, we hope that waterways can provide a way of engaging people and bringing them together in this very neutral space as well. You know, waterways can be a very neutral space because they are free to use. The majority of people can access them. Actually, around about 8 million people across the country live within 1 kilometre of one of our waterways. So that's a huge reach. 1 kilometre is about a 10-minute walk for people to be able to get to one of our waterways. So that's a huge reach that we have got. So we've got a huge role, we believe, in delivering prosperity, well-being benefits across the country. So yeah, so we look to and look forward we support the devolution project, and we look forward to continuing to working with combined authority, especially here in Liverpool, to make the most of this world-class waterfront, but right across all the other areas as well, across the nation. So yeah, thanks Jerry for inviting us here this evening to be represented. It's very valuable to us. Andy?
Good evening, everyone. As Jerry said, my name is Andy Herring. I'm one of the co-founders of the LCR Pride Foundation. I think the reason Jerry's invited us here today is we've taken what is the legacy of Prides in Liverpool and taken that to a city region level. We've looked at the impact that we wanted Pride to have in terms of benefiting. And unless you read the Echo, we're not party planners, we are a campaign. And we wanted to take that and look at how that could affect the boroughs. And when we were first setting out, we spoke to Steve and the team at the Combined Authority and started that conversation rolling. Went out into some of the boroughs, and the first response again was, you just want to do an event here, where people just go to Liverpool, that's fine. And then we started to dig down, speaking to the local authorities about what the issues that mattered to those boroughs were. And exactly what our speakers have said, it's about giving that voice to the local people. One borough spoke about a lot of mental health issues that they had there, a lot of issues that they had with young people causing what they would just say was trouble in a shopping centre. And what we were trying to discuss was, well, is that not where we should work rather than just organising a party and just organising an event? So it really did kind of open our eyes and doors really to what we could do as an organisation across the boroughs. As you say, it's trying to get out of that mentality of spreading that jam across and making sure that people think that one size fits all. And when we set out the organisation, as I say, it was about doing that. It was what will matter and what will make the difference to, it's an old stat now, but 94,000 LGBT people in the city region, their friends, their families, the people that they matter to as well. And we're not going to do that by organising just an event. So we did. Steve, very quickly after we launched our intention to hold the Gay Games in 2026. A massive bidding process that will start next year. But again, the only reason and the benefit of having that will be because we'll be going as a region. We won't be going as Liverpool. And that will pull together using the devolution that we've got, using the Combined Authorities' influence, all the different boroughs to make that into an event and make that into something that will happen, which we wouldn't have been able to do without. And I think that's the core there, as you say, that collaboration, that pulling people together to make something happen that we couldn't do. And as you say, mentioning Manchester again, we always get compared to Manchester. The interesting thing is Manchester are now starting to see as their Pride is a very different commercial beast to what we are. Lots of small grassroots prides springing up in the Greater Manchester area. The benefit that we see in the Combined Authority see is actually we've got a catalyst to help that happen here in a more coordinated fashion, in a fashion that's going to help a lot more people than in those boroughs. So it really is, we see as an opportunity and hopefully something that ticks the kind of agenda items for the local authority in terms of making the city region more equal and fair as well. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Zarina has a handheld mic, so please feel free to ask questions of everybody. We do have a gender balancing policy, so if a man asks a question, I will insist that the next questioner is a woman. That's part of how we operate here. So who'd like to ask the first question? No, I'm only joking. Yes. Only because this poor lady here had her hand up a few times and I missed her out last time. So I'm determined not to do it this time. I'm very focused. So who'd like to ask the first question? On the back row. Sorry. And then we have to have a woman next and then gentleman over here.
Hi. So my question really is to... Is that me? My question is to Philip, and it was you said that back at I didn't quite catch when there were the feeding London and it would spread out to the rest of the UK did work for a while, you said, and then it stopped. But when did it work? Why did it stop? And I don't know, should we aim to get back to turn back the clock in some way, I suppose?
Can you hear me?
Yeah, yeah.
You can hear me?
Yeah.
The period when it seemed to be working was in the early 90s. Up between the early 90s and the millennium was kind of the period when it seemed to be working. The difficulty with a lot of these things, I know that there are some other economists in the room, because there's a couple of people I recognise. One of the things with economic data is it takes a long time for data to emerge. We're much better at getting data which is closer to the real time, but the kind of things I'm talking about, it does take a while. And one of the difficulties was the data that we had back in those days was nowhere near what it is today. And I've worked with data from the 90s and 2000s on these kinds of problems. And it's only in the last few years that we've actually started to understand what was happening then. And I've published material on this. There's somebody called Ron Martin at Cambridge, some of you will know. There's a group of people who've been working on these things very carefully. So part of the problem is we're looking back and realizing what was going on. So I'll give you an example to try and understand. If you remember the good old days, so remember the period between the millennium and the financial crisis of 2008. So the early 2000s, it didn't really matter which political party people are interested in, whatever. In general, things seemed pretty good. That's not UK, that was across all countries. Interest rates were low, inflation was low, employment was high, growth was steady, countries were running fairly strong balance sheets. That was just kind of, in many countries, that was reality. And the UK was one of those. What we didn't understand, what we understand now, is if you look at this, particularly the cities and the regions, in that period when everything seemed fine, about 40% of UK cities, including many of our large cities, such as Liverpool, actually had productivity levels lower than rural areas. Instead of cities being the powerhouses driving everything, what we know now is that a huge part of our economy was actually less prosperous than rural areas. Think about that. The industrial and commercial fabrics of cities was less dynamic than places with almost nothing. That was the reality. We know that now because we look back at the data. So when the financial crisis happened, the places across Europe that suffered the most, in many cases, were large urban areas. That was true in the UK, and it's been true in many countries. But in the UK, it's particularly severe. And the shocks of the growth period of the 90s, even when everything seemed very nice in the 90s and 2000s, the former industrial cities in the Midlands and the north of England, the kind of places that we're in today, were still not catching the places that were surging ahead, the Oxfords, the Cambridges, the Readings, places like that. And then when the shock happened with the crisis, the partitioning became very, very rapid and much bigger than people understood. Now it's very clear what's happened because the data tells us that. But at the time, we just didn't really understand these things. So there was a widespread belief that what would happen would be the core of the economy, London plus, well then all the goodies will kind of spread out quickly. That's what we understood would happen because that was the evidence from other countries as well in previous periods. That simply didn't happen. And the problem is now is we don't know why. But that's where the devolution issue at the city region comes in because we are pretty clear now that one of the reasons was that we had precisely the wrong institutional and governance structures for the economy. The observation to counter it is the case of Germany. Germany has a federal system. Almost all decisions made at levels of around 4 or 5 million people, and it's on pretty much everything: health, education, research and development, innovation, skills training, very, very important. That is also true in the United States, Australia, Canada, Belgium. All the federal states, the areas where most decision-making takes place, which affect most areas of people's lives, are around the 4 or 5 million bracket. We are a 65 million unit, which, okay, now Scotland's been moving away in different ways, but basically, let's say approximately a high 50s, 60 million, more or less monocentric, mono-silo decision-making structure. Absolutely hopeless for the realities. And that's where the city devolution is so important. It's trying to break away from that and to get people to make decisions for exactly the issues that Carla was talking about and the things that we've heard here, exactly the same thing on a whole range of economic and social issues at levels which are meaningful. Because Whitehall can't tell you what to do in Liverpool. They have no idea. The problem is if there's no institutional system in Liverpool to make those decisions on the basis of local knowledge, then nothing gets done. And these are the problems that we've been facing. But there are still huge puzzles about the UK economy.
I'm going to stop us there.
Okay.
Let's try and get a few questions in. Is there a woman who'd like to ask a question? Yep.
When we look at the Liverpool City Region, is there a risk, I live in St Helens, so is there a risk that Liverpool could become the London of the Liverpool City Region, in that there is a silo and you know, everything comes out of Liverpool towards us?
I don't know. The microphone's working.
Yep.
Is it?
Yeah, it
Can
is,
you hear
it
me?
is,
It is, yeah.
That's definitely not what we're wanting, and it's certainly not what's in Steve's policy. I mean, his slogan is "No borough left behind." And that's what we aim to do, and that's what I'm sure we'll deliver.
Okay. Do you want to add anything to that, Phil? Briefly?
It's a tricky one. Why is it tricky? Because what we do know is, you know, if you look back to the city region of Liverpool, let's say in the 1980s, it didn't look like this. Michael Heseltine, when he was talking last year, you were at the event, I remember, and there's several people here who were there, just said, look at what's happened. It's astonishing. When you remember, you know, the Albert Dock, the water was green. In fact, Michael said parts of it were blue. It was so polluted. Look at the transformation of the city. So an enormous amount has happened. And what's tended to happen in most of our cities is that the redevelopment of industrial cities, former industrial cities, cities that really had their enormous growth was in the 19th century, Liverpool example of that, is that most of the new growth in the cities has tended to be dominated by the city centres. That is true in the UK. So the resurgence of Liverpool has been very much dominated by the centre, partly because of planning rules and regulations, but that's not the reason. It's because of the change in the nature of the economy. The economies are shifting to what we call an economy which is dominated by intangibles. It's about knowledge production, and that requires incredibly intense face-to-face, and that is a global phenomenon. If you look at Pittsburgh in the United States, you look at Dortmund in Germany, you see exactly the same processes. Lille in France, we are part of a process. So the focus of the resurgence and the rebuilding of our cities has been city centre focused. That is true, but that's a global phenomenon. The challenge in the coming years is exactly what you've referred to, both of you, is how to develop that growth so it becomes coordinated across the city region. That's a big challenge, but at least we're getting the systems of implementation, we're getting the people in place, the decision-making structures to try to do that. Previously, they just weren't there.
Okay. Great. We've got a question over here first, and then we'll come. And a woman next, at the very back.
Which one?
Young man next to you, yeah. No? Okay. There was a gentleman somewhere over here. And then
So,
there was,
I was wondering what the panel thought of, so some political parties have suggested moving, say, the Treasury or other parts of the civil service to Manchester or somewhere else up north. Do you think that would make a difference to this kind of whatever London-centric thing, or do you think it would kind of be just a bit of a gimmick and we've said, well, we've put that up north and then the problem's solved?
Thank you. Thank you for that question. I think it's important that we have a treasury in the north. As I've said, we know what we need. And by having devolution and our own control and our own powers in the north, we can then see where our money needs to be spent, where the resources have got to be put. I don't think it's a gimmick. I think it's an opportunity for us to use, promote jobs, wealth, and prospects in our city region.
okay.
No, I mean, there is a precedent for this. It's the United States, the Federal Reserve. Federal Reserve of New York, Federal Reserve of Chicago, Federal Reserve of DC, Federal Reserve of Philadelphia, Kansas City, St. Louis. You know, other countries have this. I mean, if you look at Germany, for example, Germany has no national export ministry. Every land does its own thing, which means that the small businesses and the big companies and the local government issues and the city leaders are all working together at a unit of about 4 or 5 million people. That's why Scotland works. It's why Scotland has devolved away, has diverged in prosperity in a positive sense. They get decisions made at a level which is meaningful to have an effect, and they're still close enough to have access to decision makers. I'm absolutely convinced that's a big reason. So an important point that you mentioned is really important, is between Mayor Rotherham and Andy Burnham, there is a very good relationship of starting to work together at the intercity level as well, looking for the challenges that we face, that they can work on together. It's a sort of prototype of this kind of system in the US. Or Germany.
Okay, we're going to go to the last two questions. Lady at the back and then the gentleman in front.
Thank you.
We take these two questions together.
Given that central government doesn't seem to know or be aware of the problems in the regions around the country, we have MPs for all the regions and the constituencies around the country, so have they not been doing their job? In which case, do we need local politicians, or will the mayor, the mayoral office, will they be better placed to actually represent the people in those city regions rather than a local politician?
Good question. We'll take your question as well, and then we'll answer both those. Yeah.
Okay. If I could also, first of all, start off by just congratulating Professor McCann on the excellent work he's done, because he has helped illuminate the facts of Brexit and the realities of what will hit this country in a very dispassionate, professional way. And we're very grateful for that on behalf of the European Movement Merseyside, because he came to speak to us on the 1st of March at a conference on world trade. And I would ask you all to look at what he's done. It's very quick and concise and brings illumination. And I think it's one of the reasons why tonight we're not crashing out. And we have an extension until my birthday on January 31st, and we'll probably have an extension well into June, but enough of the party political point. The question, the word federalism has been mentioned. It was also mentioned by Steve Rotherham at an IPPR North event in Manchester. What can Liverpool and Manchester together do to actually redress the imbalance by creating a proper federal structure in this country and rebuilding it in the way that we saw in the Victorian eras, where our cities were driving forces outside of London in creating the wealth that we are currently living on?
Thank you very much. So 2 questions. Local politicians, are they doing their job properly at the regional level, and the federal government? Carla, do you want to just answer the first one, maybe?
Yes, sure. I think they are doing their job properly, but we've got to remember that we've had a decade of a Conservative government, and their policies and the work that they've been doing and implementing is out of our control. We can campaign against the austerity that they brought us into. We can voice the concerns of our residents, but we don't have the power. Until a Labour government or an alternative government is elected, you get the same policies, same problems, and I think it would be unfair to blame MPs who are working hard in constituencies to try and promote the problems in their region, which they're seeing on a day-to-day basis. But we have to have change in Westminster. It's not working.
Okay. Second question about federation, do you think? Liverpool, Manchester, what can we do?
Actually, to me, they're two sides of the same question. They're extremely interrelated with each other. MPs of whatever party or background can only do as much as the system allows them to do. I mean, the architect of the system is critical. And what we have is a system of enormous centralization of power, and at the same time, incredible fragmentation of voice, because we have 650 members of parliament, each of whom is responding to the issues and the needs in their own constituency. But in terms of the kind of things I'm talking about, these units, these parliamentary constituencies, are absolutely minuscule. I mean, a single column, think about the kind of themes I threw out: innovation, entrepreneurship, skills, transportation, investment, whatever. A single parliamentary unit has absolutely no ability to grapple with those problems. It's far too fragmented. It's important to have these at the local level because people have a sense of buy-in, they have a sense of identity, engagement. You know, you can access members of parliament, And that, you know, they do an amazing job. I have no idea how parliamentarians sleep, to be honest, given the number of interactions they have to work on, the pressure they're under. But even with the best will in the world, the system can't respond to the issues. The countries which respond to the best are federal countries. Why? And we know this from the data. Federal countries are much more equal than unitary countries. We are a unitary country. The more centralized the country, the more unequal it is. That's just a global pattern. Whereas decentralized countries, which have very strong meso level, so not national, not ultra-local, but in the middle, the federal type levels of 3, 4, 5 million as an average across the OECD, they're just much more equal. So I would never criticize parliamentarians at all. It's just that they are working within a system of which is hopelessly unable to deal with the issues at hand. Neither central government can really deal with them, nor can local government, which is why there is an increasing awareness in many areas of society that we need to build up this meso level, and the city devolution agenda is a big first step in that direction. But it's a first step. The issues have taken 30, 40 years to get where we've got. It's probably going to take 30, 40 years to find a way to unwind them.
Thank you very much. That's all the questions we've got time for. We haven't heard so far, although the campaign has only just started in the last day, but some of the issues that Philip has mentioned, I'm wondering whether we'll hear very much, if anything, about them, even from the Labour Party. So it seems that there's some clarity I've grasped tonight. Challenging, difficult, shocking, and big decisions need to be made if we're going to rebalance the country that we're living in. And it's not just about Brexit or not Brexit, it's much, much bigger than that. So I just want to say a very special thank you to a few people tonight, particularly to our sponsors who've made all this possible. I'd like to thank the people here at Constellations, to Jess and to Bob and the other people who've been, to Ben, sorry, and the people who've been helping us around here. To Andrew and Nikki from Nonconform and all the staff behind who've been working hard. Vanessa, the catering is wonderful, and Vanessa from Bean Catering has done that. We're going to take the remaining sandwiches into the coffee bar, the bar, so they'll be available later. Andrew Hayby, thank you very much, Andrew, for your work on videoing, and the Engage board members who are here to support and help us out. Particularly to our panellists tonight, to Nick and Andy, and to our speakers, to Carla and Professor Philip McCann. Video recordings will be uploaded onto our website as soon as that's possible, probably within the next few days, I'm hoping. We'll have all 3 of them up. We'll send an email letting everybody know that they're there and available. You're not going to be allowed out until you've signed one of our feedback forms. There are pens, and Alan, would you just, and Mark, would you help to pass pens out? We've got pens. Please don't walk away with them. We've lost in the last 2 seminars 75 pens. We'll be charging you more next year. So pass the pens back. And we really need this form filling in. It helps us enormously. And finally, next year's seminar series is going to be on the theme of tourism and its impact on city centre and waterfront residents. We're working very closely with the tourist authorities in the city, who are very, very keen to have a communication, a dialogue with residents, because there are cities around Europe that are in open revolt. Residents are protesting. There's major problems. Engage wants to try and understand that and see what can we do here before we get to that level. So that's next year's theme. It should be really interesting. And we're going to bring people from Europe, obviously, to come here. We'd like to invite you to come through into the bar. We need to vacate from here, so please don't hang around in here to talk. If you'd like to move straight through into the bar is open. There's another event coming on in here, a Halloween party for tonight. And thank you all very much. I'm going to ask you to show your appreciation to Professor McCann, Carla, and our 2 guests. Thank you very much.